Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, yesterday we had the long built-up Season 4 developer preview stream for Diablo 4, and with it we had the rest of the puzzle sort of filled out when it comes to what Season 4 is going to be. All the information related to the season that we didn't already know from the PTR, and so today I'm essentially going to break it all down, talk about whether I think this is going to be enough, either as a seasonal sort of mechanic or in the greater sense of if these permanent changes are enough to sort of save Diablo 4 as a whole. And of course we'll talk about the sort of community response to it as well, at least from what I've seen so far personally. First things first, we've talked to death about everything that was in the PTR, so I won't be going over every single mechanic in this, more so talking about the package as a whole and how I think it will all come together. Generally speaking then, we should start with the itemization changes, because no matter what happens in the future of the game, what future seasons or expansions bring, this will likely be the basis of how the game functions for a very long time, so it's arguably the most important part. Codex of power changes are incredible across the board. I think it's now the way that it always should have been. You keep codex powers that you extract from gear forever, simple as that. Tempering as a system is very neat, and the devs have said specifically that this is an area they intend to expand upon in future seasons, adding new manuals with more and more interesting special affixes that you can apply to gear through this system. And given the ones that we already have and how much genuine fun I have had pushing them to their limits in the PTR so far, tempering is big on my list of positives. Then there's the masterworking system as well, materials from the new endgame activity, the pit, which in itself is quite fun, a very interesting iteration on the abattoir of Seer, and a much better one if I say so myself, and I actually really enjoyed it in PTR, and it seems to only be improving with the changes they've made since. That said, masterworking just increases affix values in each rank, with every 4th tier of master ranking, up to 12 maximum tiers, being a 25% increase to one of the affixes at random. You can even get these two stacked together so that you can get multiple of those massive bonuses on a singular affix, and that's how I got such massive dust devils in the PTR. But now skill bonus size has a cap, as well as cooldown reduction as well through the system, so sadly you can't quite do things like that, but I do also completely understand why as well, because as silly as it was not good for gameplay to see approximately 2% of my screen at any given time. Cool parts of this system are that you can reset the upgrades if you don't get the RNG rolls that you want with it, so you can't actually brick an item in masterworking, and while in the PTR, masterworking had a failure chance as well every time that you went to upgrade it, this has actually been fully removed before the actual live release, so when you do the upgrade, you get the upgrade, simple as that, making it a much less punishing feeling activity so that every time you interact with the mechanic, it is a positive, and that's the goal here. Greater affixes as a system, I'm also a really big fan of, just RNG chance to have an affix drop at 150% of its normal maximum roll, and you can have any number of these on a singular piece of gear. It's not really something that you can actively chase and actively hunt for, you can't enchant them onto gear or things like that, but it does add an extra layer of excitement from RNG when gear does drop, even when you have your ideal stuff theoretically, because you can always get upgrades if you get lucky enough from this system, and then you can restart the entire rest of the upgrades as well, or at the very least, the path to maximum power in the game now has a much higher ceiling potential, but also a much higher time requirement and RNG to reach that ceiling more than anything. And I like that quite a lot, because it seems like the game isn't going to be balanced around the 300 hour per season mark. People who wind up with that level of build are just going to be silly overpowered, overtuned, and that's how it is. This bundle, here again, the itemization changes, are the longest lasting part of the update to the game, and in my own opinion, they are extremely well done, and the community, and especially those who have tested these mechanics on the PTR, seem to agree that not only is it a significant improvement to the game overall from how it functioned before, but also that the changes they told us being made from the PTR to the live version are all very solid changes to this too. The biggest one that I want to emphasize for anyone who watched our PTR content, though, is that veiled crystals are being made significantly more plentiful in Season 4 than they have been up to this point. Veiled crystals as a bottleneck was one of my main concerns from significant playtime on the PTR, so that being attacked so aggressively in an attempt to make it less of a problem is very encouraging to see to me. On a similar note to itemization changes, is that the armor cap in the game is now 9,230 at level 100. What this means is for various reasons, not only was it really confusing that armor effectiveness scaled with monster level and not player level, and it was also causing players to have pretty vastly different levels of mitigation, especially in deep endgame, in combination with the old affix system too, of course, and so they decided to just make it sort of easy and simple, which also makes it easier for them to balance around long term, with the solution being 9,230 armor, which is the requirement for 85% damage reduction from level 100 enemies, which is the cap damage reduction from armor, now being the permanent cap. Enemies above level 100 now don't require armor that is higher than that. Any armor that you get past that specific number is a waste, and while that isn't in the game yet, they will be putting that in the armor description inside of the game game in the tooltip for the future. So 9,230 armor is now your goal. That stands for every character, every class, every build, and once you reach it, you don't have to think about armor again for the rest of the season, and that is a really solid change in my books too. On top of that, they have once again raised experience gain multipliers on every world tier so that leveling will be faster across the game, and they've also done some fun system changes like making higher tier nightmare dungeons and pit runs reward murmuring obols, which are the currency that you use at the gambling vendors within towns, and also they've made it so any item that drops from that gambling vendor in the towns, once you are level 100 on your character, will drop at 925 item power, the highest level possible. This combined with the fact that they can also give greater affix gear makes this a really fun bonus sort of loot run loop that you can have for the endgame as well, that's even on top of all the other changes that we got to do in the PTR. Then we have the host of new legendaries and uniques that have been added to the game with the Season 2. Again, we've talked about these before in greater detail, but to sort of sum it up, I really like pretty much all of them this season. They all feel like they are trying to create or significantly boost different playstyles and either create new builds or augment older, less viable builds to make them more competitive. And for the most part, from PTR testing, they were actually really effective. Dust Devil Barbarian is going to be a menace. Frozen Orb Sorcerer exactly the same, and the Rapid Fire Explosive Rogue is looking pretty neat now too, especially with the changes they've made to it since the PTR, making the aim more properly consistent now. On a similar note to this, you will now be able to trade every item in the game that isn't either crafted onto or an uber unique specifically. Regular uniques are fine to trade, and that's great in my opinion as well. Uber uniques will also have higher drop rates, specifically now having a similar but lesser drop chance from all endgame ladder bosses that they do with Duriel and Endariel being the other new addition to the boss ladder as well. So now every ladder boss has a significantly higher chance of uber uniques dropping than anywhere else in the game, with Duriel and Endariel just being higher than the others. On top of that, this season we have 3 guaranteed resplendent sparks on offer, which are the crafting material that you need 4 of to get an uber unique of your choice through crafting. 1 from the first time that you kill Echo of Lilith each season, this is a new thing being added. 1 from the first time that you kill a tormented boss each season, again a new thing. These are the level 200 extra powerful versions of the boss ladder bosses, which is worth mentioning now cost 3 times the number of materials to summon as the base boss, while giving 5 times the rewards, which is pretty much exactly what I was after in my own feedback from the PTR, where they were 5 times the summon cost and still 5 times the reward. So this is just a much better reward loop for asking the player to do something significantly more challenging, and it's lovely to see these changes being made, so I'm a big fan of the system now for the most part. And then the third guaranteed spark is from the seasonal mechanic itself, which is probably time we dive into, as this is the main sort of divisive point of the season, because the seasonal activity is called Call of the Wolves, an Iron Wolves seasonal questline type deal that also has a reputation and honor system associated with it. This is fun conceptually, and the rewards from the reputation system actually seem pretty beefy too, with the specifically confirmed things being the Resplendent Spark that I mentioned before, high item power legendaries that you are expected to reach much earlier than you would normally be able to get to that level of gear, tempering manuals that would otherwise be completely RNG drops to let you get to experience the new mechanics in a bigger and faster, more consistent way, as well as some cosmetics in there as well. And there are even some symbols on the reputation screen that have the unique rarity color scheme, so these could be uniques, but they could also just be cosmetics that have that color scheme because that's sort of how they do things. We sort of have to wait until we can get a better look at this properly in game to say for sure. But in a vacuum, I think the concepts here are pretty fun until you hit the next part, because in previous seasons there were also more focused actual activities to do. There was a new proper boss, and there was a seasonal power-up, so to say, that provides interesting ways to make builds different than any other season. Well, the boss this season is Endariel, actually, who is the new ladder boss. It's not a season-specific boss, it is a new permanent boss immediately, and you could argue technically it is also the Blood Maiden, which are the new social summon bosses, as the dev call them, that were added to Helltide, where you put in baneful hearts to an altar, you get a boss, you kill the boss, you get loads of goodies, and worth mentioning for those who played the PTR, the goodies from this boss were increased significantly. But this is directly and completely tied to, well, Helltide, which was also completely rebuilt from the ground up this season, new threat meter mechanic that builds up and throws tons of bonus enemies at you as you fight stuff, higher density in the activity in general, loads of new events and interactables, as well as even multiple new enemies, the Hellborn, the worms that pop out of the ground. Helltide just is genuinely so much incredibly better now, but the real kicker here is that Helltide is also the new seasonal activity. Obviously, I'm not implying that Helltide will disappear after the season, but I'm saying that Helltide is where you will mostly generate your Iron Wolves honor and reputation, so it is your main seasonal interaction. As for the seasonal power, we don't really have one of those this season either, technically. There's the consumable that is seasonal only that lets you scale up helltide difficulty for increased rewards, but that isn't a power, and that's sort of the sticking point here for some people. Most people do seem very happy with what Season 4 is looking to be, myself included. It is going to revitalize the game, essentially, but there's also a very vocal, unhappy crowd about the idea of essentially not having a seasonal mechanic for Season 4. If 95% of the new stuff is also going to the Eternal Realm, then what's the point of a season? And I think you're sort of looking at it backwards, really. I can understand where this is coming from, for sure, but the way that I see it is things like the tempering manuals are essentially the seasonal mechanic, right? They are a unique form of bonus power that is quite massive, and they tie directly into the Iron Wolf system, as they are the only guaranteed way of getting these because everything else is random drops. So now think of it as if tempering manuals were Malignant Hearts, and the devs knew before even adding it into the live servers that they were fully aware that Malignant Hearts were cool enough to be a permanent game mechanic. So essentially, the way that I view it is 90% of the changes are fixing up the game long term for sure, but some of the things like tempering are actively adding significantly to the power systems that we have permanently. It feels almost like the same level as a power level shakeup on a seasonals power-up system, but one that is also just instantly being chosen to be made part of the permanent game as a base layer under future seasons. The seasonal power of this season, to be completely clear, is the ability to interact faster and more aggressively with all of the new systems than you would otherwise be able to on the Eternal Realm, and faster and deeper than you will be able to in future seasons too. The only real disappointment that I've had with all of this personally is in a recent interview with Rod Ferguson, the GM of all things Diablo. He said that they were specifically holding back on revealing the season theme, so they still had one nice fun surprise to reveal to the community after the PTR. Then when they did reveal it, and the theme itself was essentially just the changes we already knew about, but packaged with the reputation system, it was just sort of really underwhelming, really immediately, but I think that comes entirely from a miscommunication, from Rod implying that there was a big reveal left to be had when the reveal was actually quite small and mundane. Because the thing is, even if the reveal itself was flat, the season itself still contains all of these new incredible things, and in a way that they won't be seen in a different season. My overall feelings about all of it are extremely positive, at least immediately off rip from this stream, because even though it would have been nice to have a seasonal power on top of this, I think anyone who is actually fully unhappy about that is underestimating just how different the endgame is going to feel in Season 4 as a base to begin with, and the gameplay as a whole, really. We're entering just essentially the next stage of Diablo 4's existence. Whether this will be the stage that makes it feel like the game we've always wanted it to be or not is still yet to be seen. But from my time testing the PTR, combined with the information they've shared since then and my understanding of it, I think if you are someone who has ever gotten enjoyment from Diablo 4, even just the first couple of weeks, even just the campaign, then you will have some found to be found in Season 4. And if you already own the game, then there is nothing to lose but time if you want to give it a chance. But you can always also stop the second you feel you aren't enjoying it. So as someone who has been just completely more than willing to speak up and loudly when things are shit in this game, this is not one of those times. It genuinely looks very good. It felt really good on the PTR, and I think an update of this size at least deserves consideration, if nothing else. Whether it saves the game or not will be up to you as an individual, because I think that is more of a subjective thing. But I can tell you for a fact that it's rejuvenated my own interest and my enjoyment after nearly a year since launch at this point. That's pretty much it then, everyone. Just a roundup of the greater concepts and changes for Season 4, as well as any changes made to them since the PTR, the things that we've learned about it in the developer stream yesterday, and just talking about how these changes sort of all intermingle with one another to create the new gearing and endgame systems, and then just a talk about how this will affect the game short term, long term, and the community's response to it so far too. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and of course feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.